The shot rang out like thunder inside the church. Pastor Elijah James stood behind the pulpit, holding his Bible high, his voice booming with the power of Sunday morning fire, when the bullet tore through his chest. The congregation screamed. Some ducked, others ran, and a few stood frozen in shock, eyes wide as the pastor's body slumped to the ground, blood soaking through his white robe. The echo of the shot bounced off the stained glass windows. A single figure stood at the back of the church, holding the smoking gun with trembling hands. It was his own brother, Samuel James. Gasps filled the room as realization hit. Samuel didn't flee. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, tears streaming down his face, while the pastor bled out in front of the choir. Nobody could move. Nobody understood. But when the truth came out, when they finally found out why Samuel pulled that trigger, that was when the real horror began. 3 months earlier, the town of Whitestone, Mississippi was as quiet as a sleeping baby. People waved at each other on the sidewalks. Dogs barked at mailmen. Children played with chalk on driveways. And every Sunday morning, everyone gathered at Holy Word Baptist Church, where Pastor Elijah James preached with such passion that even sinners came back the next week to hear more. Elijah was a tall man with a kind smile, sharp suits, and a voice that could shake your soul. People said God had chosen him. Some even whispered that he was the closest thing to a saint the town had ever seen. But saints have shadows too, and Elijah's shadow had a name, Samuel. Samuel James was Elijah's younger brother. While Elijah preached, Samuel watched from the back pew. While Elijah wore suits, Samuel wore grease-stained overalls from his job at Miller's auto shop. While Elijah lived in a 4-bedroom house with a big front porch, Samuel lived in a trailer on the edge of town with a leaky roof and rats in the walls. The town respected Elijah. They barely noticed Samuel, but the brothers had once been close. Very close. Back in high school, they were inseparable. Samuel was the wild one, the fighter, the one who always got into trouble. Elijah was the peacemaker, the golden boy who could talk his way out of anything. Samuel got detention. Elijah got student of the month. But no matter what, Elijah always pulled Samuel out of his messes. That was until something happened between them, something nobody talked about anymore. People said it was about a girl. Others said it was about money. But the truth was darker than both. That Sunday, 3 months before the shooting, Elijah was preaching about forgiveness. "If your brother sins against you," he cried, slapping the pulpit, "do not harden your heart. Go to him. Talk to him. Forgive him, as God forgives you." Samuel sat in the back pew, staring at Elijah like a statue. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight. When the choir sang "Amazing Grace," Samuel slipped out the back door. He hadn't come to pray. He had come to remember. Later that evening, a storm rolled into Whitestone. Rain slapped rooftops. Lightning cracked over the hills. Elijah sat on his front porch, sipping sweet tea, reading the Bible. The wind picked up, blowing his pages, and that's when he saw the headlights pulling into his driveway. It was Samuel. Elijah stood up slowly. He hadn't spoken to his brother in nearly 2 years. Not after that night. "Sam," Elijah called. Samuel stepped out of the truck. He looked thinner than before, paler, like the years had carved something out of him. "Got a minute?" Samuel asked, his voice hoarse. Elijah nodded. "Of course." Inside the house, Samuel sat at the kitchen table while Elijah poured 2 mugs of coffee. "I heard your sermon," Samuel said, "about forgiveness." Elijah gave a small smile. "It's a message we all need, don't you think?" Samuel stared down at his hands. "Do you remember what happened on June 12th, 1999? Elijah's face darkened. The smile vanished. "We agreed never to talk about that," Elijah said quietly. "Yeah, you agreed," Samuel said. "I never did." A long silence followed. Rain beat against the windows like angry fingers. "She was 16, Elijah," Samuel whispered. "She was 16. Elijah's eyes narrowed. "Don't." But Samuel stood up. "You lied to everyone. You lied to God. And you stood there today preaching like you're clean. But you're not. And you know it. I told you," Elijah snapped. "I did what I had to do. I saved this family." "No," Samuel said. "You save yourself." He left that night, slamming the door behind him. Elijah watched him go, his chest heaving. Then he closed all the blinds and locked every door. In the days that followed, people started noticing strange things around the church. The back door was found wide open one morning. A black feather, just one, was left on the altar. The sound system started glitching, playing strange static during hymns. Some said it was just bad wiring. Others whispered it was a warning. Then, one night, the church caught fire. The flames didn't spread far. Someone spotted it early and called the fire department. But it left scorch marks on the eastern wall, right above the baptismal font. The word liar had been scratched into the wood beneath the soot. Police were called, but no suspect were found. Elijah told the congregation it was just vandals. Teenagers, he said, lost souls. But Samuel was seen that night, watching from across the street, cigarette glowing in the dark. One morning, the choir director, Sister Carol, found a torn piece of paper tucked into her hymn book. It had 2 words scribbled in red ink. Ask him. She showed it to Elijah. He took one look at it, folded it neatly, and told her not to worry. But he was worried. He started having trouble sleeping. His sermons became louder, more desperate. He talked a lot about sin, about secrets, about wolves in sheep's clothing. Some said he was just passionate. Others said he looked like a man being hunted. The week before the shooting, Samuel was seen outside the church again, staring at the stained glass window of Jesus on the cross. He didn't go inside. He just stood there like he was waiting. That Sunday morning, Elijah showed up early. He prayed longer than usual. He wore a white robe instead of his usual suit. A new beginning, he told the deacons. The service was packed. The choir sang louder. The congregation clapped harder. Elijah's voice thundered through the room. I once was lost, he cried, but now I'm found. In the back of the church, the doors creaked open. Samuel walked in. He didn't sit down. He didn't blink. He raised the gun slowly, pointed it at the pulpit, and fired. Blood sprayed across the pulpit. Elijah fell to his knees, coughing, gripping his chest. Screams filled the church, but one voice cut through them all. A little girl, no older than 9, stood up in the front row, her dress soaked in red. She pointed at Samuel, and she said, I saw what he did that night. I saw everything. Gasps echoed across the room. Then silence. And just like that, the truth began to rise. The church was still, the kind of stillness that felt like time had stopped. Samuel didn't lower the gun. Elijah lay motionless, bleeding behind the pulpit, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Some parishioners had fled, screaming into the streets. Others were crouched under pews, praying and weeping. But every eye that remained in the sanctuary turned to the little girl in the front row. She stood alone, trembling. Her name was Rosie Palmer, just 9 years old, with 2 missing teeth and pigtails tied with pink ribbons. Her voice had been small, but her words struck like lightning. I saw what he did that night. I saw everything. Samuel turned his head slowly toward her, face pale as bone. What did you say? Rosie didn't back down. She looked at him with wide eyes and whispered, You were crying. You were yelling. And he was holding something. A box. A little wooden box. Samuel's knees gave out, and he dropped to the floor beside a pew, still clutching the gun. The silence shattered when Deacon Harris rushed up and grabbed the weapon from Samuel's hand. Others followed, someone calling 911, others trying to stop Elijah's bleeding. A woman fainted. Children screamed. But Rosie just stood there, frozen, staring at the blood pooling around the pastor's body. 2 hours later, the church was sealed off by police tape. Officers swarmed the building, taking statements, photographing blood splatters, collecting the gun. Samuel was let out in handcuffs, but he didn't resist. He didn't say a word. Rosie sat on the steps of the church, wrapped in a blanket. Her parents knelt beside her, trying to calm her, but her eyes remained fixed on the church doors. She whispered the same sentence over and over. He had a box. A little wooden box. Paramedics rushed Pastor Elijah to Whitestone General. He was alive, barely. The bullet had missed his heart by less than an inch. He was rushed into emergency surgery. Nurses whispered prayers under their breath as the doctors worked on him. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Sheriff Deeks stared at Samuel across the interrogation table. Deeks was a big man with a beer belly and a gruff voice. He'd known the James brothers since they were teenagers. "You're not saying a damn word," Deeks grumbled. "You walked into the Lord's house and shot your brother in front of a whole church. You better start talking, Sam." Samuel's lips were cracked. His eyes were hollow. "Tell me what was in the box," he whispered. Deeks blinked. "What box?" "You'll find it," Samuel said. "Just look in the baptismal floor. Under the tiles. Elijah hid it there. 15 years ago." "Samuel," Deeks growled. "Stop playing games." Samuel's voice cracked. "It's where he buried the truth." That night, with a search warrant in hand, 2 officers pried up the floor beneath the baptismal pool at Holy Word Baptist Church. They found a small wooden box. Inside was a strip of red lace, a broken necklace, a silver ring, a stack of photos burned around the edges, barely legible. One showed a teenage girl standing outside the church. Her face was circled in red ink. And then a bloodstained journal. It was dated June 1999, the same day Samuel had mentioned at Elijah's house. Sheriff Deeks opened the journal and began reading. The words were shaky, scrawled in panic, fear, and shame. "I didn't mean for it to happen. She said she wouldn't tell anyone. But she lied. She was going to ruin everything. I had no choice. God forgive me." There was no name signed at the end, but everyone in Whitestone knew that handwriting. It was Pastor Elijah James. By morning, the town was in chaos. News trucks showed up. Reporters buzzed around the hospital, the church, and the sheriff's office. The town that had once been quiet and warm was now on fire with rumors, fear, and heartbreak. Inside a hospital room, Elijah drifted in and out of sleep. Machines beeped steadily. Nurses came and went. And in a chair beside his bed sat someone no one expected. Rosie Palmer. Her mother had brought her after Rosie begged to see him. Elijah opened his eyes slowly, wincing in pain. He whispered. Rosie nodded. Her eyes were glassy, her lips quivering. "I saw you," she said. "I was hiding behind the pews. That night when you yelled at the girl. You were both crying." Elijah closed his eyes. A single tear slid down his cheek. "She was my sister," Rosie said quietly. "Her name was Alina. Nobody knows because I was just a baby. Mama told me she ran away, but she never came back." Elijah gasped. Rosie's voice dropped to a whisper. "You heard her, didn't you?" Elijah didn't answer. He didn't have to. Back at the police station, Samuel stared at the wall of his cell. His hands trembled. His knuckles were red. He remembered the night like it was yesterday. June 12th, 1999. Elijah had called him in a panic, told him he needed help, that something had gone wrong. When Samuel arrived at the church, he found Elijah standing in the back room, shaking, drenched in sweat. There was blood on his shirt. A girl lay crumpled on the floor. Samuel recognized her, Alina Palmer, the pastor's Sunday school student. "She threatened me," Elijah had whispered. "She said she'd tell everyone I touched her, that I made her." He didn't finish the sentence. Samuel had been frozen, speechless. "I didn't mean to," Elijah had said. "I just wanted her to stay quiet." They buried the evidence beneath the church. Literally. Samuel wanted to go to the police, but Elijah swore it was a mistake, a one-time thing. And he cried. Oh, how he cried. And he made Samuel promise to protect the family, protect the church. Samuel kept that promise until the guilt began to rot him from the inside out. A week after the shooting, Elijah remained in critical condition. The journal had been confirmed as his, and forensic evidence tied him to the items in the box. Church members were stunned. Some refused to believe it. Others demanded justice. Some gathered at the steps of the church to cry, others to shout. Rosie Palmer's parents made a public statement confirming that Alina Palmer had been their daughter, that she had disappeared 15 years ago, and that police had always believed she ran away. Now, they feared the truth was far worse. And then, something else happened. One of the photos from a box, badly burned, was enhanced by forensic experts. They found a faint image in the background. A mirror. In the mirror, reflected clearly, was Samuel James, standing behind Elijah, watching and smiling. That revelation shook the case to its core. Had Samuel known all along? Had he helped? Had both brothers shared the same sin? Sheriff Deeks stared at the photo for a long time. Then he slammed his fist on the table and growled. "We're not done here. Not by a long shot." That night, back in his cell, Samuel woke up to find a note slipped through the bars. No name, just a message. "We know what you did, and so does she." He turned the note over. There was a black feather taped to the back. And suddenly, Samuel James began to scream. Samuel's screams echoed through the small jail, chilling the night shift officer to the bone. Deputy Lyle, who had been sipping coffee and watching reruns in the break room, dropped his mug when he heard it. He ran down the hallway and found Samuel on his knees, face drenched in sweat, eyes wild with terror. "The feather!" Samuel shrieked. "She's not gone. She's not gone. I buried her with him. I helped him." Deputy Lyle fumbled for his radio. "Sheriff, you need to get down here. Now." By the time Sheriff Deeks arrived, Samuel was curled in a ball on his cot, rocking back and forth, mumbling to himself. Deeks stepped into the cell, knelt down, and held the note up in front of Samuel's face. "Who sent this, Sam?" Samuel didn't answer at first. His lips trembled like he was speaking to something invisible. Finally, he whispered, "She did." "Who?" Deeks asked. Samuel looked up, and for the first time, fear had fully taken over him. "Alina." Deeks' jaw tightened. "Alina Palmer's dead. You told me. The box. The journal. We found the truth." Samuel's voice dropped to a whisper. "No, you found a piece. There's more." Deeks stood and motioned to the deputy. "Keep him under watch. No visitors. Not even lawyers." But as he walked away, Samuel's last whisper stopped him in his tracks. "Check the choir room. Under the floorboards." The next morning, Sheriff Deeks, accompanied by 2 officers and a crime scene technician, returned to Holy Word Baptist Church. The congregation had been banned from entering since the shooting. Dust covered the pews. Blood still stained the pulpit. A single rose lay in the exact spot where Elijah had collapsed. Deeks moved through the sanctuary slowly, making his way to the choir room. It was small and quiet, lined with old hymn books and robes hanging on hooks. The smell of mildew and old would fill the air. "Here," Deeks said, pointing to the corner. He said under the floorboards. The technician pulled out a crowbar and pried one of the floor panels loose. Beneath it was dry dirt and a broken wooden beam. At first, it looked empty. Then the tech gasped. "There's something here." Wrapped in a tattered quilt was a second box, larger, darker, stained at the edges. The tech lifted it slowly and handed it to Deeks. Inside, there was a cassette tape, a key, and a blood-stained ribbon. Taped to the top of the box was a handwritten note. "If this is found, then I'm already burning." It was signed, E. James. Deeks stared at the tape. No label, no date, just one side marked with a red dot. Back at the station, he dusted off an old cassette player and pressed play. The tape crackled, and then Elijah's voice filled the room. "I never meant to kill her. I told her it was love. I told her I'd leave everything behind for her. But when she got pregnant," Deeks stiffened. "She said she'd tell. Said she'd expose me. I begged her. I begged her not to. Then she said she told Sam. That he knew. That he saw us. I didn't know what to do." The tape hissed. "So I used a wine glass. I crushed the pills into it. I thought it would just make her sleep. I swear to God, I didn't mean to kill her. But she stopped breathing. And when Sam walked in, a pause. I told him it was an accident. He helped me hide her. But I think he always knew I did it on purpose. That's why he's been watching me all these years. Waiting. Click. The tape ended. Sheriff Deeks sat in silence for a long time. Then he picked up the key from the box and turned it in his hand. It was a safety deposit box key from Whitestone National Bank. That afternoon, Deeks visited the bank and found the box registered under Elijah's name. Inside was a single envelope containing a letter and a photo. The photo showed Alina Palmer in the back of a pickup truck, smiling. The letter read, "To whoever finds this, you need to understand, I never stopped loving her. But love can turn into something ugly when fear takes over. I let the church become more important than truth." And Sam, he knew. He kept the secret, but it poisoned him. He wanted to protect me, but it broke him instead. I only hope, someday, God finds a way to forgive us both. Because I can't. Elijah. That night, Rosie Palmer sat at the kitchen table, hugging her knees, watching her mother cry over a cup of cold tea. Her father sat quietly, holding the photo the sheriff had brought them, the one of Alina, their lost daughter, their murdered child. Rosie whispered, "Mama, can ghosts come back?" Her mother looked at her, startled. "Why would you ask that?" "Because," Rosie hesitated. "At the church, when I stood up, I didn't mean to say anything. I just heard her voice. Inside me. She told me to say it. She told me where the box was." Her mother dropped the teacup. It shattered on the floor. Rosie looked out the window into the backyard. A black feather floated down from the sky. At the hospital, Elijah James awoke in the dark. No machines beeped. No nurses moved. He looked around, confused. Then, at the foot of his bed, he saw a figure. A girl. She had long black hair, a torn red ribbon in her curls, a white dress stained to the hem. "Elijah," she whispered. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. "You told them I ran away," she said. He gasped, breath shallow, trembling. "But I never left," she said. She stepped closer. "I've been waiting." He reached for the call button, but his hand wouldn't move. "I told you I was going to tell," she said, "and now I will." Elijah's eyes went wide. His mouth fell open in a silent cry. The lights flickered. The machines flatlined. Doctors came rushing in. But by the time they reached the room, Elijah James was gone, and in his cold, lifeless hand was a single black feather. The morning after Pastor Elijah James was pronounced dead, the town of Whitestone awoke to more than mourning. They awoke to whispers. People spoke in hushed tones at the diner, on porches, and in parking lots. Everyone knew someone who had been inside the church that day. Everyone knew someone who had heard the little girl say those chilling words. And now, Elijah was gone too. Not by gun, not by poison. His heart just stopped. Or at least, that's what the hospital said. But those who'd seen the look on his face, the way his body was twisted in frozen terror, the way his fingers clutched that black feather, those people whispered a different story. They said she came for him. Samuel James hadn't spoken since Elijah died. Not a word. He sat on the edge of his cot in the jail cell, staring at the floor, rocking slowly. His beard was thicker now, unkempt. His eyes looked sunken in. He'd heard. It told him Elijah was gone. He just nodded. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. Didn't sleep. The guards noticed strange things happening near his cell. Lights flickering when he walked past. The TV switching to static without warning. The sound of a girl humming, softly, sweetly, in the dead of night. But every time someone checked, no one was there. At the Palmer home, Rosie had stopped speaking altogether. She hadn't said a word since she told her parents about the voice inside her. Her mother kept her home from school, hoping time would heal whatever was happening. It didn't. One night, Rosie stood in the hallway outside her parents' room. Her mother was asleep on the bed, clutching a picture of Alina. Her father sat in a chair, staring out the window. Rosie whispered, "She's still here." Her father turned slowly. "Who, baby?" "Alina." His face paled. "She's watching," Rosie said. "Not to hurt us. Just to finish what she started." He stood and walked over to her. "Rosie, you need to stop talking like that, sweetheart. Alina's gone. We know what happened now. She's at peace." Rosie shook her head. "No, Daddy, she's not." She looked up at him, and for just a second, one small, flickering second, he swore he saw Alina's eyes staring back at him from Rosie's face. He stumbled back. But Rosie had already walked back to her room and shut the door. Sheriff Deeks stood at the edge of the church property, holding a folded letter in his hand. It had been mailed anonymously to the station, no return address. Inside were only 5 words. "You haven't found her yet." And below that, "Check the creek." He remembered the place. Briar Creek ran just behind the church, winding through thick trees and overgrown brush. Kids used to swim there in the summers, before the water turned brown and the snakes came. Deeks followed the trail down to the water's edge with 2 deputies behind him. The smell of wet earth and decay hit them instantly. The sheriff scanned the creek, remembering something Elijah had once said at a youth picnic. "If you bury your sins in water, they'll wash away. The Lord takes what's lost." But now, Deeks wondered what Elijah had meant. One deputy called out, "Over here." They found it buried near the base of an old willow tree, a mound of disturbed dirt, partially washed out by last week's storm. They dug. What they found made them all step back. It was a skeleton, small, teenage, wrapped in the same choir robe Elijah had worn in his early years of ministry. Around the neck, a silver chain with the letter A. It was her, Alina Palmer. Her body had never been under the church. Not fully. She'd been in the water all along, and no one had ever looked. Until now. That night, the entire town gathered outside the church. Candles were lit. People wept openly. Some prayed for Elijah, some for Alina, but most stood in silence, shaken by the discovery. Deeks held a press conference the next morning. He confirmed the remains were Alina's, and that charges were now formally upgraded against Samuel for accessory to murder, conspiracy to conceal a body, and obstruction of justice. Samuel James helped bury a crime that should have never been hidden, Deeks said. He may not have pulled the trigger that ended her life, but he buried her like a secret. And secrets don't stay buried forever. In his cell, Samuel finally looked up. He asked for one thing, to speak to Rosie. The sheriff refused at first, but Rosie she asked too. I want to hear what he has to say, she said calmly, standing in the station lobby, holding her mother's hand. Her voice was small, flat, like she wasn't fully there, like she was someone else. Deeks eventually agreed, but only under strict supervision. Rosie walked into the visitation room. Samuel sat on the other side of the glass. He looked up, his hands trembling. You're her, he whispered. Rosie tilted her head. I knew at the moment you stood up in that church. You're Alina, aren't you? You came back. Rosie didn't answer at first. Then she leaned closer to the glass. She told me everything, she said softly. Every little secret. And she told me there's one more. Samuel's eyes went wide. She said you lied. Rosie continued. You didn't just help Elijah, did you? Samuel swallowed hard. She said you were there. The night before, Rosie whispered. She said you loved her too. Samuel's breathing grew shallow. I didn't hurt her, he said quickly. I loved her, but she chose him. She always chose Elijah, and I couldn't stand it. I begged her to run away with me. She said no. Rosie's eyes locked on his. She said she was afraid of you too. Samuel broke down. I just wanted her to love me back, he sobbed. But when she said she'd tell everyone what he did, I thought it would destroy everything. I told him. I told Elijah. And I knew he'd do something. I knew, and I didn't stop it. Rosie stood up. You didn't just bury her, she said. You gave her to him. Then she pressed her hand to the glass, and the lights in the room flickered. Samuel backed away from the glass, breathing hard. Rosie smiled, but it wasn't Rosie's smile. It was Alina's. Later that night, as Samuel lay on his cot, a sound began to rise in the jail again. The soft hum of a girl's lullaby, a familiar melody, one Samuel had heard only once before. June 11th, 1999, the night before she died. He opened his eyes, and she was standing there, in the corner of his cell, the red ribbon in her hair, the white dress, no blood, no wounds, just sadness. Sam, she said softly, why didn't you stop him? He screamed, again and again, and this time, the door to his cell unlocked itself. Slowly, by morning, the guard would find it wide open, but no one inside, just a single red ribbon left on the pillow, and a second feather, black, still wet. They searched all day, every field, every alley, every crawl space in Whitestone. Samuel James had vanished without a trace. The surveillance cameras inside the jail showed something that chilled the blood of everyone who saw it. At 2:37 a.m., the cell door clicked open on its own. No one was near it. No keys. No passcodes. Nothing. The footage showed Samuel waking up, standing slowly, stepping to the threshold of the door, and pausing. Then, as if he were listening to a voice no one else could hear, he nodded and walked out. The final frame caught a faint silhouette behind him, a figure in white, standing in the dark corner of the hallway, just standing there, watching him leave. Rosie Palmer didn't sleep that night. She sat on her bed with the lights off, staring at her window. Her room was filled with drawings, bright flowers, smiling suns, stick figure families. But now she was drawing something else. A girl, Alina, over and over again. Rosie didn't remember picking up the red crayon. but she'd drawn the same image 34 times. Alina standing at the edge of the creek, arms stretched out, something black floating behind her. Not wings. Not exactly. Feathers. Rosie's mother came in the next morning and screamed when she saw what Rosie had written on the wall in red. He wasn't the only one. The town spiraled deeper into panic. 2 days after Samuel's disappearance, the mayor called an emergency meeting at City Hall. Reporters surrounded the courthouse steps. Candlelight vigils for Alina turned into protests demanding accountability from the church leadership. People were scared of Elijah, of Samuel, of what the truth might mean for the town's soul. And then something else happened, something no one could explain. The creek dried up. Overnight, where once water flowed steadily between the trees, there was now cracked mud and the smell of death. Dozens of dead fish littered the bank. People came to stare. No rainfall in days, but somehow the creek bed had gone bone dry. At the very center of the empty stream was a message, carved deep into the mud, clear as daylight. One is left. The sheriff's office roped off the area, but it was too late. The story had already spread. Sheriff Deeks knew what the message meant. There was one more secret, one more person involved. He pulled the files again. Everything from a 1999 case when Alina had gone missing. Every witness statement. Every known associate. He dug until his eyes burned. And then he found it. One report, unfollowed. A janitor from Holy Word Baptist named Claude Renner had filed a statement on June 15, 1999, 3 days after Alina disappeared. The report said Claude had seen a young girl arguing with a man in the church kitchen around midnight. He never got a good look, but he said the man was wearing a choir robe. It wasn't Elijah, and it wasn't Samuel. It was someone else. Deeks tracked down Claude at the county rest home. He was 76 now, half blind, riddled with arthritis, and mostly forgotten. But he remembered the scream. They thought I was drunk, Claude said, squinting through cataract-clouded eyes. Said I made it up. But I heard her, crying, begging. I saw the robe, but the man had a limp. Elijah didn't limp. Neither did Sam. Deeks felt the weight settle on his chest. There was one other person who worked late that summer at the church. Assistant Pastor Milton Griggs. He had a limp from a car crash back in 1998. He'd moved out of state shortly after Alina's disappearance. Said he was called to another church in Alabama. Nobody questioned it. Until now. Sheriff Deeks made the call that same afternoon. Milton Griggs now pastored a small congregation outside Mobile. The town was quiet, rural, and almost entirely off the map. The new church was called House of Pure Grace. Attendance, 42. Deeks got his car, radioed the department, and drove. It was a 6-hour ride. The last hour of that trip, his radio picked up static. His headlights dimmed, and for a moment, just a flicker of a moment, he saw a figure in the road ahead. A girl, standing still. He slammed the brakes, skidded across the dirt. When the dust settled, the road was empty. Nothing there, but on his windshield was a single black feather. Milton Griggs lived in the house beside the church. White paint, cracked steps, wind chimes on the porch. He opened the door with a tired smile. "Sheriff Deeks," he said, "I heard you might be coming." "Ow?" Deeks asked. Griggs smiled. Things have a way of getting around. He poured them both coffee, offered a seat at the table. Deeks didn't touch the mug. "You were at Holy Word in 99, Deeks said. "You were close to Elijah. Close to Sam. You worked late nights." Griggs nodded slowly. "I remember Alina." "What happened to her?" Deeks asked. Griggs looked out the window. "She wanted to expose Elijah. He asked me for help, calming her down. I said no. I told him to confess. But he wouldn't. That night, I saw Sam yelling at her in the hall. I told him to stop. I went back to my office. That's all I know." Deeks didn't buy it. "You had a limp back then," he said. Griggs's smile didn't fade. "Still do. And Claude Renner says he saw you." Griggs's face twitched. "I didn't touch her," he said, voice suddenly cold. "But I saw what they did, and I didn't stop it." Deeks stood. "You're coming with me." Griggs raised his hands. "You want to eat cuffs, Sheriff? I've been waiting for this." As they stepped outside, wind chimes clanged violently, though there was no breeze. And in the dying light, Deeks noticed something strange. The trees across the field were full of black feathers. Hundreds of them. Back in Whitestone, Rosie sat in the empty church, alone, her hands in her lap. Her parents didn't know she was there. She stared up at the pulpit. Alina's voice had returned. She was never going to stop, Rosie whispered. A sudden gust of wind blew through the stained glass window. It didn't break, but the wind was real. Rosie's eyes rolled back for a moment, then snapped forward. "Milton's next," she said. Then she stood up and walked toward the altar. That night, as Deeks and Griggs returned to town, something happened. Griggs began to sweat in the passenger seat. He clutched his chest. "I need to stop," he gasped. "I can't." Deeks pulled over, opened the door, and Griggs stumbled out onto the grass. The wind picked up, whispering, low and sharp. Griggs looked up and saw her. Alina. She stood at the tree line. She wasn't bleeding. She wasn't crying. But her eyes were full of truth. Griggs dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he screamed. "I tried to stop them. I wanted to protect you." Alina didn't move. She only raised her hand and pointed behind him. Griggs turned and saw the creek, but it was full again. Rushing water, black feathers floating like lily pads. And in the center of the creek, Samuel James stood waist deep, smiling. Griggs screamed, and then he was gone, pulled under. The water stilled, and Deeks, frozen on the roadside, knew Alina's justice wasn't finished. There was still one more. But who? Sheriff Deeks didn't speak for hours. After watching Milton Griggs disappear into the water without a splash, without even a single ripple, he stood motionless on the roadside, eyes wide, mouth dry. The creek had vanished again, just gone. Where water had rushed only moments ago, there was now dry earth and broken roots. The black feathers? Gone. Samuel James? Gone. Milton Griggs? Gone. And the wind stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. When he finally got back to town, Deeks filed no report. How could he? No one would believe that a ghost had pulled a man into a vanishing creek, that a dead girl had pointed, that the trees had whispered, that a child, a 9-year-old girl, seemed to know who would die next. He sat at his desk long after midnight, staring at the stack of evidence. Elijah's journal, the burned photographs, the cassette, the red ribbon, the 2 black feathers, and Rosie's drawing. Alina by the creek, arms open, feathers rising like smoke behind her. He didn't need to ask if it was happening. He needed to know who was next, because only one message echoed louder than anything now. One is left. Rosie didn't return to school. Her parents tried. They dressed her, packed her lunch, walked her to the bus stop. But the driver said she never got on. They searched the house, the neighborhood, her friends' homes. They called the sheriff. Deeks checked the cameras at the church. At 8:43 a.m., Rosie walked calmly through the church's front doors, barefoot, her hair unbrushed, eyes blank. She didn't look at the camera once. She moved like she was in a trance. She never came out, not on any camera. Deeks drove straight to Holy Word Baptist, unlocked the front doors, and stepped inside. The air was colder than usual. The sun barely filtered through the stained glass. And though it was empty, it felt full. He called out, "Rosie?" No answer. "Alina?" The silence bent. Then a small, echoing giggle bounced through the rafters. It wasn't Rosie's voice. It was Alina's. Rosie stood at the pulpit. She looked over the empty pews, just as Elijah had done for decades. But she didn't hold a Bible. She held a single page from Elijah's journal. On it, the final entry. "I wasn't the only one who touched her." And beneath it, he watched, and then he helped. She looked toward the confessional on the sidewall. "I know you're in there," Rosie said. There was a creak. The door opened slowly, and out stepped Deacon Harold Winters. Gray hair, square jaw, a cane in his right hand. One of the oldest members of Holy Word. Served under 3 pastors. Beloved by the town. Known for his sermons on discipline, forgiveness, and the purity of the flock. Rosie looked him dead in the eyes. "You were the first," she said. His smile didn't move, but his eyes shifted. "I don't know what you're talking about, child." "Yes, you do." Harold's voice dropped. "You're just a little girl who's been listening to too many stories." "She told me," Rosie said. "Alina." She showed me. The back room. The basement. Before Elijah. Before Sam. You heard her first. His face twitched, and then his mask cracked. He stepped forward, face darkening, fingers curling around his cane like a weapon. "Do you know what happens to little girls who lie?" he hissed. "Yes," Rosie said. "They die." She reached in her coat and pulled out something small. A feather. Not black. Red. Harold froze. His eyes went wide. "No." But Rosie held the feather high. She said, "This one's for you." The church lights exploded above them. All at once, the stained glass shattered inward, raining shards onto the pews. The air dropped below freezing. The cross on the wall behind the pulpit cracked down the center and fell. And there, rising from behind the altar, was her, Alina, full form, no longer ghostly, no longer flickering. She was solid now, flesh and blood and fury, wrapped in the choir robe they buried her in, eyes glowing red like dying coals. Deacon Harold screamed. Alina raised one hand. He dropped his cane, tried to run, but every door slammed shut. She stepped forward, each footfall echoing like thunder. "You were the first," she said. "You started it. You let the others follow." Harold dropped to his knees. No, I was sick. I confessed. I begged God to. "You buried me," she hissed. "But I remember." And then he began to burn, not with fire, but with light. A searing, bright, white-hot light pouring from his eyes, his mouth, his fingertips. He howled, his body arching, flailing, crumpling, and then silence. A pile of ash sat where he once knelt. Rosie didn't move. Neither did Alina. They turned to each other. Alina stepped down from the pulpit. Rosie reached out. Their hands touched, and in that moment, the two became one. Rosie's body shook. Her mouth opened, and Alina's voice came out. She was never gone, she said, only waiting. Then Rosie fainted. She awoke in the church nursery, covered in a blanket. Sheriff Deeks sat beside her. She blinked slowly. "Is it over?" He stared at her, speechless. "Is she gone?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He only looked down at the floor, where two sets of footprints had walked away from the altar. One small, the other barefoot. That night, Whitestone slept uneasily. Some said they saw a girl walking along the edge of the woods, humming. Some swore the cross atop the church glowed red for exactly 1 minute at midnight. And in the creek, which had returned once again, the water was crystal clear, still, peaceful, but on the bank, one final feather waited, blood red, and tucked beneath it, a folded note. Deeks retrieved it himself. It read, "All debts paid, all names spoken, but sin doesn't drown. It just waits until the next voice calls it by name." No signature, just one last sentence. Rosie remembers everything now, and then the wind returned. Soft, whispering, calling someone else. The following morning, the town of Whitestone awoke to a thick, unnatural fog. It rolled in from nowhere, blanketing houses, smothering fields, swallowing the church steeple whole. The air smelled of burnt candles and river moss. Birds didn't sing, dogs didn't bark, and Rosie Palmer didn't speak. She hadn't said a word since she woke up in the nursery. Her mother tried everything, coaxing, music, even holding her favorite stuffed animal in front of her. Rosie just sat, staring out the window, blinking slowly, drawing circles on the fogged-up glass with her fingertip. Sometimes her finger moved before her hand did, as if someone else were guiding it. She wrote a single word, "Return." Sheriff Deeks was losing sleep. He stood in his office, rereading the final letter found by the creek. All debts paid, all names spoken, but sin doesn't drown. It just waits. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea that after all the blood and fire and truth, something was still waiting, still hungry. He had sealed up the church, posted signs, even sent requests to the state board to have the property condemned. But something told him it wouldn't matter. Alina had found peace, but something darker had taken her place. Something that wasn't about justice anymore. 2 nights later, the fog thickened. Street lamps turned dull and orange, flickering like dying stars. Power lines hummed with static. People called the police to report strange noises in their yards, like children laughing, even when there were no children nearby. Sheriff Deeks got a call from the Palmer household at 2:11 a.m. Rosie was gone. The bedroom window was open. A single black feather sat on her pillow. Her drawings had changed overnight. Once filled with stick figures and rivers, they now showed symbols. Circles, eyes, a dark figure with outstretched wings and no face. On the back of her door, written in red crayon, I remember. Deeks ordered a town-wide search. They found nothing. Until sunrise, a jogger spotted her. Rosie was standing in the center of the church, doors wide open, lights off, barefoot again. Just standing, facing the altar, the same place her sister had died. They brought her to the hospital. Monitors beeped steadily, but doctors couldn't explain her condition. She's not unwell, one nurse said, confused. But she's not here either. She stared at the ceiling, still, until they placed a Bible on the nightstand. Then, without blinking, she spoke. Not in Rosie's voice, but in someone older, slower, rougher, a man's voice. The sins of the father will echo through the children. Sheriff Deeks, standing outside the room, went cold. What did she just say? He whispered. Another phrase came next. What they buried in the basement was not her. Rosie turned her head, slowly, mechanically, until her eyes locked with Deeks through the window. You should never have opened the box. The glass cracked, right where her hand touched it. Deeks drove back to the church that afternoon, alone. The air was wrong. Quiet again. Not peaceful, just watching. He entered through the back, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. He moved past the pulpit, past the baptismal pool, past the choir room, into the basement, a place nobody had touched in years. The wooden stairs groaned under his boots. The smell of mildew and rot was thick. He swept the flashlight across the room. Old shelves, collapsed hymn books, bags of unused communion wafers. Then he saw it, a small door, half covered by a broken cabinet. He moved it aside. The door was locked, but above it, carved into the wall, was the symbol from Rosie's drawings. A circle, an eye, and beneath it, do not open. He opened it. Inside was a single chair, a rotted rope, a cracked mirror, and on the floor, in a pile of salt, another box. But this one wasn't wooden. It was stone, and cold to the touch. When Deeks touched it, he felt something move inside his chest, like a whisper curling into his lungs. He should have stopped. He knew that, but he didn't. He opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Not of Alina, not of Rosie, but of other girls, other towns, dates going back decades, different churches, different preachers, different victims. A ledger was tucked beneath the stack, written in the same careful, righteous pen Elijah James used. We are not the first. We are the middle. The root goes deeper than any one town. Names, signatures, symbols, more than he could count. Then a final photo, the most recent, taken just a week ago. Rosie, sleeping in her bed, a feather on her nightstand. Sheriff Deeks dropped the box, but the whisper inside him did not leave. It settled in, smiling. Back at the hospital, Rosie sat up. The monitor flatlined for 3 seconds, then came back, but her eyes were different now. She looked at the nurse and smiled. "Do you believe in angels?" she asked softly. The nurse hesitated. "Yes, sweetie. Of course I do." Rosie nodded, then whispered, "Some of them fall." Sheriff Deeks returned to his office, box in hand, face pale as paper. He didn't speak to anyone. He locked the evidence in the vault. He went home. He took down all the crosses in his house, and he burned his Bible. That night, before bed, he received a text from an unknown number. Just one sentence. "You opened it. Now you're part of it," followed by a single emoji. The next day, the town woke to birds falling from the sky. Dozens. Dead. Their feathers black as night. Rosie didn't come home from the hospital. She walked out without being seen, into the woods, toward the creek. She hummed the same lullaby Alina used to sing. And in the mirror of the water, she wasn't alone. Dozens of faces swam beneath the surface, watching, waiting, and then one hand emerged from the water. Not hers, a man's hand, then another. And from the deep, Samuel James rose again. But this time, he brought something else with him, something not entirely human. Rosie turned and smiled. "We're almost finished," she said, and the sky above Whitestone cracked open with thunder. The final chapter was coming, but the final price had yet to be paid. Thunder rumbled like distant drums, as the town of Whitestone trembled beneath a sky split by unnatural lightning. A storm had rolled in. No weather alert, no forecast, just sudden black clouds that churned and twisted above the church steeple. Birds no longer flew. Dogs refused to leave their porches. The town square, once filled with weekend chatter, now stood silent as a grave. And at the edge of the creek, Rosie stood barefoot in the mud. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even Rosie anymore. She was something more, something older. Behind her, Samuel James stood in soaked clothes, face pale, skin veined with dark lines like cracked glass. He was no longer the grieving brother, the angry accomplice, or the broken man who had walked into the church with a gun. He had returned, yes, but he hadn't returned alone. The thing beside him wore the skin of a man. It smiled with a mouth too wide. Its eyes were not eyes at all, but swirling, bottomless voids that looked through things. It had no name, not one that human tongues could speak, but its purpose was clear. It fed on secrets, and Whitestone had given it a feast. Sheriff Deeks sat at his desk, gripping a photo of Rosie. He had spent the night reading through the stone box's ledger, page after page of names, towns, symbols, rituals, and entries dating back nearly a century. All of them had one common thread. Each town had a church. Each church had a buried truth, and each truth had called it forth. The creature, the watcher in the creek, the angel of broken things. It had always been there, beneath the surface, waiting for sin to ferment, for guilt to fester. It didn't hunt. It was invited, by silence, by cover-ups, by men like Elijah. And Deeks had opened the door. He stood and grabbed his shotgun. It wouldn't help, but it made him feel human. At 3:06 p.m., the bells of Holy Word Baptist began to ring on their own. One long chime every 6 seconds. The sound echoed across the town. People gathered outside their homes and watched. Rosie walked up the church steps. Slow, calm. She turned to face the crowd. Behind her, Samuel and the creature stood, waiting. I remember everything, she said, her voice echoing unnaturally through the air. The names, the secrets, the hands that hurt me, the mouths that stayed quiet. She looked directly at Sheriff Deeks. You wanted justice. He nodded slowly. This is what justice looks like, she said. She raised her hand, and the wind stopped. Time paused. A feather fell from the sky, red as blood, and landed at Deeks' feet. Everyone in town felt a weight in their chest. And then it began. The creek rose. Black water surged through the streets, rushing with impossible speed, swallowing fences, ripping up trees. But it didn't destroy randomly. It chose. Homes where silence had lived. People who had known and done nothing. Rooms where confessions had been hidden, where screams had been muffled. The water found them and took them. Inside the church, Rosie walked to the pulpit. She placed the red feather in the center. And for a moment, the creature knelt, as if she had authority over it now. From behind her back, Rosie pulled out Elijah's journal. The original, not the burned pages, not the edited copies, the whole truth. She placed it beside the feather, and then she burned it. Fire roared through the church, devouring the pews, crawling up the walls, cracking the stained glass from within. But Rosie stood untouched. As the flames surrounded her, she whispered, "Let the truth set you free." The roof collapsed. The church was gone. By dawn, the floodwaters had receded. The sky was clear. Whitestone stood, changed but standing. 23 homes had been lost. 8 people were never found. Holy Word Baptist was nothing but ash and bone. But the creek ran clearer than it ever had. At the edge of the ruins, Rosie sat in the grass. Normal again. Just a little girl, hair tangled, toes dirty. Sheriff Deeks sat beside her. "Is it over?" he asked. She looked at him. "It never ends," she said softly. "But it pauses." He nodded. "I'm tired," she whispered. He picked her up gently, carried her to his truck, and drove her home. Years later, people still talked about the Whitestone cleansing. No one called it what it was. No one used the word judgment. But deep down they knew. And every year, on the night of June 12th, the town fell silent. No one went to the creek. No one entered the woods. And no one, ever again, tried to bury a secret beneath the floor of a church. On the last page of Elijah's second journal, hidden away in an archive no one dared open, there was a final entry scrawled in haste. She was not the sin. She was the mirror, and we all saw what we are. At the edge of Briar Creek, beneath a willow tree that has never bloomed, a single feather rests in the grass. Not black, not red, but pure white, waiting for the next name to be spoken.